Welcome to Lair the Alchemist, where we discuss all things heavy metal and hard rock. For today's episode, another in a series of what I call milestone moments. These are moments in a band's career where they release a legendary album, a groundbreaking album, or maybe new members come into the band that push them in a whole new direction. The band and the album that I've picked for today is the band Death and their 1991 masterpiece, Human. This was the fourth album for Chuck Schuldiner Death. Their first album, which I have on the back of my battle jacket here, was Scream Bloody Gore. Their second album was Leprosy, and their third album was Spiritual Healing. With every Death record, Chuck was always pushing the boundaries, searching for new sounds, wanting to expand the sound of death metal. And he did that with each of his first three records. But the leap from their third album, Spiritual Healing, to Human is just massive, otherworldly. Chuck takes the sound in a whole new direction. What some people would say is the birth of technical death metal or progressive death metal. And Chuck does this with the help of a brand new band. He brings in on bass Steve Digiorgio, who was in Sadist at that time, an amazing bass player. He brings in from the band Cynic, Sean Reinhardt and Paul Masvidal. Sean on drums and Paul on guitar, two amazing musicians that bring a whole new sound to the band. One could say even a jazz fusion influence from Sean's drumming and Paul's guitar playing. And at the time, amazingly, they were only 20 years old. And with this group, Chuck pushes the limits of death metal, of riffing. This album is just full of absolutely incredible riffs. It's jam-packed with one riff after another. And at this point in the band's career and Chuck's writing, they were almost without influence. You could say that maybe Watchtower or Merciful Fate, you could hear some of that in it, but really at this point, Chuck is just, his riffing and his songwriting has moved into its own world. The riffs on the record and the changes, they go from one to another, and it's just incredible how they flow from one riff to another. And it's these amazing changes, and each song has its own feel to it, its own vibe, its own aura. And the songwriting on this album is just incredible. These songs, even though they're progressive and have lots of different changes inside them, they still make sense. There's still melody to them. There's still structure. There's just great songwriting. Too often I hear technical death metal albums where it just sounds like it's a bunch of complex riffs sewn together. Yes, these riffs are complex and progressive, but they make sense and they flow and they're catchy. Themes repeat, riffs come back in. The guitar solos are filled with melody and catchy. The lyrics and the vocal parts, there's choruses to the songs. And I should also comment on the lyrical themes on this record. Chuck, at this point, has moved beyond the stuff that you hear on the first and second records, the gore and the horror style lyrics. He moves into a whole new world of introspective lyrics and looking inside the mind for the horrors inside everyone's minds and in the world outside of us. He was going in that direction with Spiritual Healing, but he really focuses in on that with this record. And like I mentioned, the playing from everyone on this album is just incredible. Especially Sean Reinhardt. His drumming is just otherworldly. The jazz fusion feel that he brings to this. Yes, it's got the double bass drums and that type of death metal drumming, but he adds all these different types of accents and fills and syncopated lines that at this point, I don't think anybody had heard anything like this in an extreme band like Death. In fact, I would go to say that this has some of the best death metal drumming out there is on this record. So let's get into the album. Flattening of Emotions starts off with this tribal drum thing that fades in, and then this quirky, heavy guitar riff. It's about a person who's hearing voices in their head, losing their mind. It's got this awesome part where the band stops and it goes into this and that's kind of something that happens a lot on this record where the band is going along, it stops, there's like a crazy riff, and then it drops down into a whole new section, a whole new tempo, or it drops down in key, or the riff goes up or down. And it is so tight on this record, and this is before computers. So this was all played for real. There was no Pro Tools to cut and paste things. They had to play all this. It's just absolutely incredible. The gear shifts and the tempo changes and the sudden key changes and the rhythmic changes on this album across all the songs. It's just amazing. Next is Suicide Machine, which is a song about euthanasia and asking the question, should people have the right to take their own lives if they're in pain? Again, the lyrics on this record are so deep. I encourage you, if you listen to it, to look them up and follow along. And Chuck's voice is just perfect on this. It's anguished and pain and the scream, death metal, powerful death metal voice, but you can understand every word he's saying on this, which is something that gets lost on so many other death metal records, where you can't understand anything that the singer's saying. But with this, you can understand everything that Chuck is saying. Together as One is about conjoined twins. And it's got this crazy shifting meter part after the guitar solo, where it's going like from 5/4 to 4/4 to 5/4. It's this crazy syncopated odd meter thing. Going back to Suicide Machine, there's this awesome, like this happens a lot on the record where there's these effects put on the guitars, and there's a spot in Suicide Machine where there's and the drums are going crazy and the bass is going nuts underneath it. I should also highlight the interplay between Steve Digiorgio and Sean Reinhardt. It's just amazing. I wish the bass was a little bit louder on this record, but you can still, for the most part, hear what's going on. It was recorded at Morrisound Studios, the famous Tampa recording studio where so many death metal bands recorded. And in general, the mix is just super heavy. The guitars are heavy. You can hear everything on the drums. The bass sounds good. I wish it was a little bit louder. I have the Relapse reissue of this where they supposedly remixed it. So for me, it sounds super hefty and super big. And also note the awesome album cover. Up until this point, it was more for Death, more comic booky looking covers. But here was this awesome cover that it just sort of encapsulates the whole album, this sort of cerebral thinking and deep thinking album. You also have Secret Face, which starts off with this start-stop sort of guitar intro, da-da-da, da-da-da-da-da, and then the song kicks in with the fast chugging riff. It has this awesome thing, which is, for me, is like a Death trademark, where he says, Secret Face, and then it echoes and repeats and fades out, Secret Face, Secret Face, Secret Face. Anytime I hear any other band do that, I always think of Death. To me, that's like a Death trademark. There's this crazy syncopated drum and bass stuff going on in this song. Again, that's sort of all over this whole record. Next is Lack of Comprehension, which they actually had a video for this song, believe it or not, when MTV Headbangers Ball, they used to play awesome stuff like this. It's actually a pretty short song at 3 minutes and 40 seconds, but it packs so many different things into it. It's like all these songs, there's all these different riff changes and turning corners. You never know where it's going to go next, but it all makes sense. It doesn't feel forced. It doesn't feel like they're just putting things in there just for the sake of being technical or extreme. Everything makes sense and everything serves the song. And although there's incredible playing all over this record, it never feels out of place. It never feels like anybody's just showing off for the sake of showing off. It all serves the purpose of the songs. In fact, listening to these songs, it made me think as I was listening to it today, it's sort of like walking through a haunted house. It's dark. You know that something's coming up around the corner, but you don't know what it is. And that's the way these riffs are. You know there's a change coming. And then it goes into this, and you're like, whoa, where did that come from? This riff is just, it is so crazy. How did Chuck do this in his mind, put these together? It's absolutely amazing the way these riffs move one into the other. They seem like they shouldn't fit, but he makes them fit. And there's an uneasiness and an unsettled nature of the music and the riffs that fits perfectly to the songs. And he's able to even do that in a song like Lack of Comprehension that's only 3 minutes and 40 seconds long. It starts off with the bass and like a clean guitar, playing his thing, and then it kicks into the heavy, super fast riff. And if you watch the video of this, you'll see what I'm talking about with Sean Reinhardt. He's like a octopus doing all this cymbal stuff. He's got all these drums set up. Totally awesome. See-Through Dreams. It's about somebody who's blind and what they see in their dreams and shadows. Again, the music perfectly fitting the mood, the riffs, the way it's just unsettling, the way the one riff moves to another jarring riff and these sudden tempo and changes and key changes. Next is an instrumental, Cosmic Sea, which has these awesome layered keyboard pads in it. It sets up this sort of atmospheric, spacey mood. And then everything drops out and there's this like bubbling like synthesizer noise, and there's this super cool bass solo from Steve Digiorgio. And then the album ends, and in that song there's all these awesome guitar harmonies. And there's a spot in the song where the guitar comes in and it's got some sort of effect on it, like a harmonizer effect. This is a dissonant sound, but it works. And again, this sort of rolling, the way the song builds and comes down and gets heavy, gets quiet with the riffs. Incredible songwriting. And that's the point with this whole record for me, is that there's song structures here. You hear choruses repeat. You hear riffs and themes repeat that tie everything together. Yes, there's a ton of different progressive and changes and everything in it, but it all feels melodic, and you remember it after you hear it. Too often I hear technical and brutal death metal things that they just go right by me. There's no hooks. There's hooks all over the place on this record. And then it ends with Vacant Planets, which is a song about spaceships landing and people having to go below to live below the earth. It's got, again, yet more crazy riffs that just fit this sort of sci-fi vibe of the song. And it has this awesome guitar line that goes out while the bass is playing this crazy like melodic bass stuff. There's all these other cool effects on Chuck's voice, like in See-Through Dreams. The music starts fading out, and Chuck lets out this like scream that they turn into this weird effect that just hangs out way past after the song has faded out. Chuck has another great scream in Together as One, where at the end of it he just lets out this massive like scream. It's one of my favorite. Like, Chuck's voice changed a little bit across the different albums, and this is, I think, some of my favorite vocal stuff from him on here. So again, this is just a milestone album, not only for death, but for death metal. And Chuck was always a couple steps ahead of everybody else. But when Human landed, he just took off. And from this point, after this, Symbolic and Sound of Perseverance, he just kept going with Control Denied, where things could have gone if Chuck was still with us today. Sadly, he passed in early 2001, or later 2001, I believe. And also, sadly, Sean Reinhardt has recently left us, an amazing drummer. His influence on death metal, again, this album, a blueprint for technical death metal, and Sean Reinhardt laying the foundation for that. If you want to hear more of Sean and Paul's great playing, listen to the band Cynic. So this is just an amazing album from top to bottom. There is nothing weak on this record. Every song is great. It's a textbook of how to write a great death metal record. If you're a traditional metal fan and you've never listened to really any death metal and you're hesitant to get into it because of the vocals and everything, this is a great album to start with because it's catchy. You can hear the lyrics. There's hooks in the songs. Everything makes sense. Everything works. It's a perfect death metal album, in my opinion, and one of my favorite death metal albums of all time. So that's it for today. Milestone Moment, Death, Human. Let me know what you think in the comments. Make sure you hit subscribe and like. And until we see you again, make sure you stay heavy and stay metal.